This is my video summary of the fabric of the cosmos. What is space? And so they kind of start off by talking about how space is the most abundant thing in the universe. To illustrate that example, they use the Empire State Building as an example. So if you took all of the space out of all of the atoms within the Empire State Building, you would end up with a little tiny dot about that big, probably about the size of a grain of rice. And it would weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds, but that's how small it would be, because there is that much space contained within and in between atoms. So then the question is, well, what is space? And they talk about how if an ice skater was spinning and you took away all of their reference points, would they still know that they're spinning? Yes. The reason for that is because they can feel their arms spinning as they spin around. So Newton, his idea was that space was like an empty stage, and that we're actually all moving relative to space. Einstein, his idea was that the speed of light is what's constant, not space. So we don't move in relation to space, we move in relation with the speed of light. And so with space-time, we adjust. So if we're moving through space, we adjust our time so that it fits that constant for the speed of light. If we're moving through just time, then the space changes, right? He also proposed that gravity is just a path that is created by warped space-time. So the easiest way to sum it up between their two ideas is that Newton thought that space was static, while Einstein thought that it was dynamic. So they went about trying to prove Einstein's theory, and how they did it was they used gyroscopes. They used 4 of them, and they launched them into orbit. Because gyroscopes their axis is always going to point down, they figured if they aim the axis towards a distant star, then they could tell if it was able to move. So instead of being like this the whole time, if it angled, then they would be able to tell, and they'd be able to measure it. They had these 4 gyroscopes out on a satellite. And they kept saying, they thought that it was only going to be 2 to 3 years, and then everyone kept saying it was going to be 5 to 10 years away. And then 35 years later, they finally were able to achieve it. The project almost got canceled 9 different times, and even towards the end, it almost didn't happen because there was a wobble in the gyroscopes, and it was going to be millions of dollars to fix. They ended up getting some other investors, and they were able to use the information that they gathered. And what they found was that Earth, in fact, twists space, which was pretty cool. Moving on from the astronomical side to the quantum side, they found that empty space isn't actually empty. There's a scientist by the name of Higgs who described space as being an ocean, and that particles moving through the ocean or moving through space gain mass as they move. This led to his idea of the Higgs field, and people are trying to chip off a piece of that field using a hadron collider. So basically they just bombard particles with one another to try and chip off a piece of that space. What they have found within space, though, is dark energy. Dark energy, it's a very small force, but it's basically like anti-gravity. It's pushing things apart instead of pulling it together, right? And so the universe is literally being pushed apart. Einstein theorized that the universe was either contracting or expanding. It wasn't just going to stay the same. And Hubble, like the infamous Hubble telescope, right? He actually proved that the universe is expanding, and that it's expanding at an exponential rate. And Einstein had actually proved mathematically that it was expanding, but he called it his greatest blunder because he had to go back and change for this this idea of having an anti-gravity. But then when they took it out, it actually fixed his equations, and they were able to predict that it is in fact speeding up and that we're expanding quicker than ever. Now the problem with this expansion is an idea called the Big Rip. So if dark energy continues to increase over time, what's going to happen is atoms are actually going to break apart, and it's going to tear the universe. It's going to tear the universe apart. They kind of ended the documentary on a weird note with how our reality could just be a projection, that we could just be a two-dimensional image on the surface of a black hole, and that we really don't know what space is, and that that very well could just be that we're projections, and that we think that we're interacting, but in actuality we're not. Super cool documentary, super cool series, The Fabric of the Cosmos. Yeah, it definitely makes you think a little bit more. Einstein definitely had a hand to play in all of it, and seems like he was always taking it one step further than where Newton got to, which is the cool thing about science.